morning, everybody, and a big warm welcome to all of you joining us this morning for the first in our webinar series ahead of Workplace Wellness Festival 2022 next month. I'm Tanya Arlington, Event Director at Workplace Wellness Festival, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the land we're broadcasting from today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. We are absolutely thrilled to be partnering with the amazing team at Groov as our title sponsor for Workplace Wellness Festival 22. Groov is a workplace mental wellbeing platform co-founded by former All Black and mental health advocate Sir John Kirwan, who will be leading the discussion today with an amazing lineup of panelists exploring how they are moving the dial in their business, what results they've seen, and the science behind it all. Sir John Kirwan, or JK as we know him, is the co-founder of Groov and a globally recognized mental health advocate, author, entrepreneur, and rugby legend. In 2012, JK was knighted for his services to mental health, and we're absolutely honored to have JK back on the virtual stage with us today. Good morning, JK. Great to have you with us, and we're absolutely thrilled to be able to share these insights with the Workplace Wellness Festival community.
Yeah, thanks. I'm so excited about today, so excited also about, getting back in person finally in a little while. How
Yes.
cool is that to be? How cool
Absolutely.
is that to be?
Yeah, so I'll hand over to you, JK, to introduce the panelists, and then I'll see you back here at the end.
Can't wait. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I know how busy everybody is, and so for you to attend, I thank you sincerely. We're really excited about this webinar, and we're really excited about being title sponsor of the Workplace Wellbeing Festival 2022, where I hope you all will come and say hello to us, which would be great. Now, if I can wind, can you think that it was a few years ago now where COVID wasn't in our life, and we're actually starting to talk about workplace wellbeing and its importance? But I think we're at the point now where, because of what's happened, because we've been accelerated into this space, there's some amazing initiatives and data on hand to support how it is just the right thing to do. It's good for your people, it's good for business, and that's what we're going to dive into today. You know, we have an incredible panel, and I'm really honoured to introduce them. I'll start with Ingrid Jenkins, HR lead, Microsoft Australia and New Zealand. Ingrid joined Microsoft Australia in October 2015 in the role of HR director. Now serving Australia and New Zealand, Ingrid and her team are accountable for partnering with Microsoft ANZ leaders to bring to life Microsoft's mission to empower every person and every organisation on the planet to achieve more. During her time with Microsoft, Ingrid has accelerated the focus on employee wellbeing and the role of organisations in enabling their team members to thrive. What a great word. This focus has only been magnified over the pandemic, where Ingrid has also had the opportunity to be part of Microsoft global teams to help inform the approach to employee wellbeing and mental health. Ingrid has a Bachelor of Economics degree from the University of Sydney and a postgraduate qualifications in Human Resources Management. Prior to Microsoft, Ingrid had held HR leadership roles at Telstra, Toll Holdings, and Alcatel-Lucent. Wow, amazing. Just talking about that, and I'll carry on shortly. But, you know, who could have thought a little while ago, and this is one of the things I spoke to Microsoft back a little while ago, isn't it neat to know that people have cats and they walk behind them and kids run into the room and all those things we didn't know before the last few years. So on to our next guest, Skye Crawford, Chief People and Cultural Officer, AIA Australia. Joining AIA Australia in September 2020, Skye is an established human resources executive with over 20 years of experience across a diverse number of industries, including financial services, professional services, mining and consumer services, with a career focused on driving change in a complex organisation, and in particular delivery of various joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, and the resulting integrations. Skye has a passion for building sustainable business where people can thrive. With this in mind, Skye also has a strong commitment to coaching other leaders and executives so that they can positively impact the people and organisations they lead. Previously to AIA, Skye led HR for all customer segments at Australia Post, supporting a significant transformation in organisations' go-to-market model. Board member of Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia, Yahoo. How good. Brooke O'Keefe, HR manager, Randstad Australia. She is a global leader in the HR service industry. They support people and organisations in realising their true potential. They do this by combining the power of today's technology with their passion for people. They call it human forward. As HR manager, Brooke leads a national team of HR business partners and HR's advisors in this role. Brooke is responsible for developing and driving the people strategy in order to deliver upon our company objectives. Brooke holds a master's in human resources management from the University of Technology, Sydney. Dr. Fiona Crichton, who's my workmate. Fantastic. Fiona is a health psychology specialist with hands-on experience designing effective programs to improve health behaviour and well-being in the community. Fiona's experimental research in the nocebo and placebo effect has also been published in a range of high-impact peer-reviewed medical and academic journals. Combined with a prior legal career incorporating roles as a litigation lawyer and legal writer, Fiona's work in health psychology has provided her a breadth of knowledge about the factors influence psychological well-being and adaptive behaviour change. She is a clinical team lead here at Groov and provides the brain science behind how we can improve our well-being. And basically, she's amazing because she has to work with me, and she's always helping me really dive into some of these things that we need to talk about nowadays. I often talk, and then I'm going to throw to you, Dr. Fiona, about, I always say this. Bill Gates came across the border 40 years ago and he brought us Microsoft Windows. He said, I'm going to put a laptop on everybody's hands. And he's done that, and then Steve Jobs stood up and said, I'm going to give everyone one of these, and he did that. But, the future, I believe, of productivity, the retaining of great people is actually the genuine care, Fiona, with actually looking after people. So as we look at all these leaders, and we're talking across Australia and New Zealand, and just before I throw to Dr. Fiona, if you look in the comments and you have questions and you want to ask them, I will relay them to this fantastic crew of people I have with me. So don't be scared to throw in any questions you have, because the knowledge that we have, not mine by the way, but the knowledge we have in this little webinar is amazing. So welcome, team, and I'll throw to you, Fiona, to give us a little bit of a thought, things to think about.
Yay, JK. It's always a pleasure to be on a panel with the amazing JK, because although we might have a lot of learning when it comes, academic learning, when it comes to some of the things we're talking about today, JK has lived experience, but also we've been working in this space now for a number of years. And so he does bring unique insight, because he's one of the few people I know that people will open up to. So we have learned a lot in the last 4 years going around New Zealand and Australia and actually talking to people within organizations to find out what their stress points are. And today, one of the things we want to talk about is not just what the problems are, but what are some of the solutions. The idea for us, all of the people in this room, is that we want to be doing things to shift the dial. It's not enough to just be uncovering what we think the pain points are, because we are hearing things right now like burnout, psychological safety, attraction and retention. All of those things are issues to be solved. But what are we finding in the workplaces that we work with, and your workplaces, Ingrid, Skye and Brooke, that we see as actually working? Now, one of the things that we did at Groov over the last couple of months is we went out and we found out what was a linkage between my workplace doesn't care about my well-being and my thoughts of leaving. And one of the things that we saw that was actually really profound was that if you believe that your workplace doesn't care about your well-being, your risk of leaving is at about 36% of people who feel that their workplace doesn't care about their well-being think about leaving most days. And that actually drops to 6% if you believe that your workplace cares about your well-being. So it's actually something that's important, I think, for all organizations to think about, not just because of that ethical thing about we want people to be doing well, but we actually know that if it does, we're going to attract and we're going to retain our best talent. And at Groov, what we've found is that if we are doing things, shifting the dial by actually getting individuals to have their own plan around their well-being, but also to bring well-being into the workplace through rituals, which is one of our sort of Groov facilitators of behavior change, is to bring well-being in. So that one of the things that we have seen, and I'm going to throw it open to the three of you, is that when workplaces spend some time reflecting on what they've done, what they've achieved, if they actually spend some time thinking about yesterday rather than always focusing on tomorrow, that what we're seeing is a shift in that feeling of value, and that is translating into, I think my workplace actually cares about us. And so one of the rituals that we have found has worked within workplaces is to take those tiny things, those tiny small things that allow someone to walk away at the end of the day to feel like they've contributed in their workplace, that actually, yeah, we've done quite a few things. We're not just worried about tomorrow, we've actually celebrated where we've come. When we've had an opportunity to speak up, had an opportunity to discuss and contrary opinions, all of these little things are making a big difference when it comes to, one, the feeling that the workplace cares about my well-being, but also in terms of my feeling that I want to come to work tomorrow and I feel like this is a yaha, yoo-hoo, rather than a, oh, that old chestnut, I have to rock up to work tomorrow. So for us, it's been those small things where it's about reflection on successes and starting to feel valued that's making the difference. So I'm going to ask you, Ingrid, what are you seeing in your workplace when it comes to actually making a difference when it comes to that workplace well-being, feeling cared for?
I just loved hearing what you were saying then, Fiona. And I think that appreciation and that everyday appreciation too, not an annual moment. And so we're trying very much to encourage that in the moment appreciation and sharing it with others as well. We all feel good when we feel appreciated, and it doesn't have to be big things. It could just be helping each other in a given time. I also think one thing that we regularly talking about this. So when Stephen Worrell, our MD, is at an all-hands event or talking with our people leaders, this is always top of mind. And I think the authenticity of how he talks about it, because he not only talks about it in context of all these magnificent offerings we may have, but also the challenges that we have and the things that we're still trying to overcome. And I think that brings credibility, that people think you know what we're feeling, you're in touch with our sentiment, you're talking about it regularly, and we're feeling that sincerity and how you show up because you talk about it regularly, but also in how your leaders, and the tone at the top, I think, is critically important as well. And we also recognise the support we give at the individual level, but also our organisational accountability. And so whilst we will support individuals in their own endeavours around how to look after your wellbeing, we recognise that our organisation contributes to that. So very deeply understanding that and talking that through. For example, we have some challenges where people say there's too much work. We don't feel like our prioritisation is as crisp as it could be. So talking about those things, recognising the feedback, and then sharing our learning and how we're trying to improve those things. There's just some of the things we're doing. Thank you.
I might throw to you because I think that's really interesting. We often hear about survey fatigue, and yet if you genuinely talk to someone about their well-being and then you action it very quickly, that actually changes. They're very happy to do those surveys. And I know, working at AIA with my mate Damien, it's been a really interesting couple of years for you folk here in Melbourne. So I'd be curious to know what you're doing, because sometimes we come out with, Thrive, we come out with all these things. You've got Survive, Revive, Thrive strategy. How you make that real for your people and so they feel that genuine care.
Thanks. So I started in September 2020. I thought it was kind of to the tail end, and lo and behold, I think we're right in the middle of COVID. So I think when I started, I was really pleased to see that AIA already had a very structured approach around how they were supporting their customers, their partners, and their people as well. So it was survive, revive, and thrive. So the strategy being, really just get through it, let's face it, in terms of COVID, but getting us through to really thrive at the end. And I think we're not quite thriving yet if we ever get away from this thing called COVID. But during that time, we put a lot of practical measures in. And I think your comment there around the surveys, etc. We did survey through the period on specific topics to get some input from our people on how they wanted to work, what they really thought about vaccination, the hybrid ways of working. Do you want what kind of hybrid do you want? So, and then we made sure we actually went back and calibrated our approach. So, all of you have leadership teams. They're all people at the end of the day, and everyone has their own views and opinions. And so really taking the time to listen to our people and then play that back on, well, we thought we were going to do this, but actually you're telling us these are the things that are going to work. So we're going to recalibrate our approach. And we're still doing that to this day. I think we're all learning what this new normal way of working is and changing things along the way. I think the other thing I want to touch on is also the support for our leaders, because any of you who are in a people leadership role would attest to how hard it's been leading teams through COVID and out the other side and trying to figure out what this new way of working is really challenging. So we did put a lot of support in for our leaders as well. We built conversation cards and toolkits and all sorts of things that could help them navigate engaging in a different way instead of having all their people physically in front of them. And a lot of the more junior leaders in particular had never had to do that. So how do you start to build that capability as well? And as we move back in to the organisation and spending time physically together, we've had a lot of people, myself included, start in the middle of COVID who have never physically met people before. So I think that the new challenge we've got is connectedness. And we're running a pilot program at AIA where we're getting called Social Connectedness and actually partnering with the Chicago Booth School of Business on that. And so it's a behavioural science study to actually start to build barista. We've got a barista and build some coffee conversation starters to get people who have never met each other to actually talk about a meaningful discussion though. So rather than just, who are you? Nice to meet you, prompting them with a bit more of a deep and meaningful conversation about, getting to know each other at a deeper level. And we'll then be assessing how that goes in terms of the social connectedness side of things. So a bit of science and a bit of the behavioural piece built in as well. But, a few different strategies in play for us.
Yeah, we love that. Fiona and I love that because I do the lived experience and she does the science. But I think it's really, science was amazing for me, just understanding what was going on in my brain when I was unwell to make me feel normal. This is normal. Brooke, I know that recruiters we've worked with have been, it's been a really stressful time. Where did you focus to keep your team well and as something that is very, very difficult to do in this new world?
Yeah, I think we implemented our wellbeing program, I guess kind of early, just before COVID. And obviously it's based on a few different pillars, but it was agile enough that we could change and adapt depending on what was happening to our people at the time. So if I cast my mind back to in the thick of it with COVID, people across the country experiencing quite different things as well. Queensland, we had for a lot of the time our people were still in the office every day, but in Victoria we still people haven't met face to face for a couple of years. So resonate with that example, Skye. So it, for example, there were periods that were financially quite difficult for our people. So really supporting them to focus on what was in their control at the time. And also, then kind of things shifted. So we found ourselves in quite prosperous economic times. So then the challenges become different and we start to hear words like burnout, so much work. So for us, being able to hear what our people were saying was really important, and to get not to discount the manager's intuition, but to also have some more meaningful data that could allow us to really get to the nitty-gritty of what was happening or what our people were feeling. So we did that through a tool that monitors, excuse me, our employees' voice through surveys, and we experimented with that around the frequency. We were conscious that people talk about survey fatigue, and our people were saying that. But what we found was, and I think this with most insights, particularly people insights, when you look at things on the macro, they appear pretty good, but it's the insights that you find from digging deeper. So, for example, we had we're going through some really busy periods, and we pay every week around 12,000 casual workers. And so our payroll team are pretty big, and they're pretty crucial to our business. And we started to hear some murmurs around, feeling like burnout, overworked. So we, were able to really dive deep into that and act on those insights. So taking a really close look at how tasks were allocated, and also just making the investment of hiring more people to support with the workload. So yeah, it really varied over the past few years, that's for sure.
I think that's probably, when I talk about the space and agile, that's what it is for me. It's actually listening, moving quickly, and then implementing some of the things that they want. Pete Jensen's said, Skye, love your comments on social connectedness and Bursta. I've just been back from Europe and wrote a piece recently on Swedish social ritual of fika, which entails coffee, food, and conversation. It's enshrined in their workplace law, which is cool. But Pete also asked a question, I'll throw it to you, Fiona, but I'd love for all of your comments because it's something that I'm passionate about. Has anyone on the panel or Groov created measures for the presence of wellness rather than the absence of illness? And, we talk about prevention we talk about ambulance, we talk about the fence at the top of the cliff rather than ambulance at the bottom, but it's a different way to look at stuff, right, Fiona?
Yeah, Pete, and you're definitely speaking our language. Now, when it comes to well-being, what we do know from the science, let's take it to the science, is that if we are moving people on the wellness continuum rather than the mental ill health continuum, because they're different, they're separate but interrelated, is that we can actually, if we move people from languishing to flourishing, just shift them along that continuum, that is really protective on that other continuum, the mental ill health continuum. And so what we've done at Groov, and I'll be interested to know what everyone else has done, is we've created a measure. I'm a great one for assessment. And I know that there is this real kind of allergic reaction, the idea that we will assess, our people are sick of assessment, stop assessing. But the reality is that if you want tailored solutions, we need to know where the pain points are. So what we've created at Groov is what we call a 6-pillar well-being assessment, and it's action-based. It's to find out what you're doing for your well-being, and every component of that assessment, which is about the well-being continuum, we would be assessing your activity around 6 pillars of well-being. And this is about individual well-being. We understand that in workplaces, you have to look after individuals and leaders, and also the organization has to be conducive to well-being. But if we just look at individuals, you would say everyone should have a plan around their well-being. Everyone should have something that stands down their amygdala, because we're living in a time of great stress. We need to have something in our day that we feel connected. That connection that was spoken about by Skye, that social connectedness is important, because as human beings, we are actually wired for connection. Having stuff in our day that allows us to engage our brains, and most of our work probably ticks that box, but being creative, having moments in the day just to be curious is important for well-being. Making sure that we're moving a little bit in our day, because we know that sitting is a great predictor of poor well-being. Making sure that we all have things in our day that allow us to celebrate ourselves, reflecting on our own successes, celebrating those little goals. And finally, having things in our day that we enjoy is also all very predictive of well-being. So we assess that, and then we also assess how well you've done in terms of stress management, your ability to bounce back from stress, and your ability to experience positive emotion. And what we've seen is if we move that in a workplace, and this is what we've done, we measure that, and then we find out where individuals need to make their difference in terms of leaders or in terms of individuals. And when workplaces provide this opportunity to actually look at individuals creating their own well-being plan matched with their measure of well-being, is that we move modeling of well-being by leaders, we're moving psychological safety, we're moving employers being given time for workplace well-being, and mental well-being being discussed without stigma. But also what we're seeing is that when they're doing that, we're also improving those things: management of stress, ability to bounce back when tough times come. And we know right now tough times, they've not just come in, they've come, and people are experiencing more positive emotions. So I think, Pete, that you're absolutely right. We have to move away sometimes to that pathologizing of mental well-being and say, let's look at the good side of it. How can we make sure that our people are, to Skye's word, thriving? It's not always going to be the case that you wake up in the morning and you're going, aha, but having those moments in your day is protective of your productivity at work and also the way that you operate at home. So that's what we've been doing with our 6-pillar wellbeing measure, which we have at Groov. So I'm going to throw again to you, Ingrid, and you can tell me what you're doing right now when it comes to that measurement around the wellness rather than the mental ill health part.
It is interesting, and even the education with our teams around when we talk about mental health, it's not in context of purely just talking about mental illness. And I think that sort of helps pivot people too in how they think about that recognition. We've all got mental health. I think just building on what you said, Fiona, I think where we've seen some of the shifts, and we talked a lot about employee sentiment today. And I think to your point, John, we do ask a lot of our teams in terms of that regular feedback. We know how important that listening is. And I think to Brooke's point, making sure that we're actually building solutions or initiatives that are solving for what our teams are looking for. And I think people don't mind contributing to providing their feedback if they feel it's heard, and we respond through the actions that we take. And so some of the shifts we're making, Fiona, in that context is how we're shifting the type of questions we ask as well. And certainly in that context, recognising good work is good for you. And so very overtly asking questions around level of empowerment, the level of energy you feel around your role, in context of the meaningfulness, because we know if you're doing something very purposeful and meaningful, it feels good, that contribution for individuals too. So I think, Fiona, to answer your question, we're intentionally shifting the way we're asking questions, which also helps inform people around actually, how am I feeling about the meaningfulness of the work? Do I feel empowered? And that's really helping us in terms of the context of where we need to prioritise.
Skye?
Finding my mute button.
Yes.
I think the specific question around presence of wellness, I think we're probably no different from most organisations, is sometimes we have so much data we don't quite know what to do with it all. So we have all the data points to get that insight, and particularly our program of Vitality, which I'll touch on a bit further later, around science-backed, driving you to do the small things every day around your own health and well-being. That actually gives us an engagement measure. So, how engaged are people in using Vitality? There's a whole lot of correlation measures we could be doing off the back of that. So, subject to how engaged you are in Vitality, it is game-based. So it's about interventions that sort of lead to early addressing of health and well-being, but then also using some overlays around that data to understand how does that then flow on to correlations around broader organisational health. So we've got all the data, but it's probably the exercise of bringing all that together is a bit of a work in progress. And we have a number of studies as well, certainly with a number of our partners, to start to test this space as well. But nothing fully developed quite yet.
Brooke, what have you been finding?
Yeah, I think perhaps a little bit more tactical, but in terms of like moving that dial and focusing on rather than fixing problems for our people, but focusing on allowing them to thrive. It's come up a few times, that word. An example of that springs to mind is recently we reviewed our EAP supplier, or traditionally known as EAP. And we, for many years, we didn't have quite a traditional partner, and there was this stigma around this is who you call if you've got a problem. So we've partnered with a new organisation who it was interesting, you know, getting all the collateral and really just the tone of how that's positioned is actually to help you thrive and to place your well-being at a like as a priority. So yeah, that's kind of one example of who we're partnering with as well, and the I guess the tone of how that's positioned too.
I'm going to put two of the questions together because they both fascinate me and going to be difficult for you all to answer. So I apologise because it is quite complicated. But so Christine wanted to get your thoughts on the topic of loneliness. And I guess that comes into the workplace as well. And then Richard said, you know, I work in health and wellbeing. I have a fluid team, mixed teams at the coalface, and there is what is like home. So I call it, there's no you know, work-life balance anymore. It's just life. So people are actually bringing their issues to work. So I'll maybe start with you this time, Brooke, to talk about how you safely, because we say at Groov, we don't want you to be the expert, you know, but we do want you to put it on your, you know, on your daily list of things to talk about. So any experience around or advice you can give to people about how you are approaching some of those things. That's really been, and Ingrid, Steve and I spoke about this often, and he's an amazing leader in this space. We spoke about how we just used to leave this shit at the door, people, right? We just used to bring in our game face, our work face, and leave half ourselves at the door. That's changing. So just all your thoughts, starting with you, Brooke, on how you deal with someone who might, you know, the loneliness thing, but then also approaching there is no work-life balance anymore, it's just life.
Yeah. The loneliness is something that we recognise, and that lack of connectedness, particularly within our organisation. We've got a lot of expats, and over the last few years, people have it's been really tough to be away from their families overseas, not being able to travel, even interstate, and experiencing some of those quite major life events away from the people that you know, they care and love about the most. So. And then we also saw there was a lot of people who just weren't taking a break. So we actually decided to get on the front foot, and we implemented this program called Workaway program. And we're actively encouraging people where they can to get on planes to we've got lots of people about to head off to European summer, but to head home and to see their people and regain that sense of connectedness. We've allowed our people to work from anywhere in the world for a period of I think for about 4 weeks, and they can also take 4 weeks annual leave, so they can be overseas for a couple of months and really make that trip worthwhile. So yeah, we certainly didn't underestimate that how important that connectedness was to the overall well-being of our people.
Awesome. Throw to you now, Ingrid, maybe.
Sure thing. I think two things that come to mind for me is at Microsoft, at the heart of our culture, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And historically, we've separated that almost. We have our diversity and inclusion strategy and we have our wellness strategy, where increasingly, obviously, the two are merging. So I think that inclusion piece and how we are supporting our leaders particularly, but everyone, to understand what does it mean and what is your role to create an inclusive environment. Because there's one thing to be connected, it's another to feel as though you're really valued for, you know, who you authentically are. And that that is never one magic, wand to do that. But I think intentionally connecting in inviting everyone and setting an expectation actually around everyone has a role around inclusion, and helping with the education around what that looks like and how you can facilitate that inclusion and connectiveness is a journey that we're on. And in parallel, I think, particularly in context of hybrid, reminding our leaders particularly to personalise what hybrid means for each individual. I think we talk about hybrid very generally, but really understanding how does hybrid work for you as an individual. So it's inviting conversations, I think, to really personalise and making sure our managers really connecting with the individual around what that connectiveness looks like for them. How do they work? How do they want to best facilitate their connection into the organisation? And so again, we're all learning together. I don't think anyone has declared victory on any of this, but they're all symbols as well to individuals around, we understand that you're an individual, that you have personal preferences. We understand we all have a role to play in making sure we all feel included in the environment we're in.
That's so cool. I mean, just before I throw to you, Skye, the interesting thing that Fiona and I have found is that people think they need to have the answers. This is a worldwide pandemic, people. Relax. Try stuff, but you've got to actually comms with your people and get that feedback. It can't be one way. But it is scary. So it's okay to be a little bit scared because, when Ingrid says, I'm going to talk to each individual about their hybrid learning, and that was one of the questions from Elena, that's scary. But if they feel that you're reaching out and trying to understand where they come from, then you will make some really good progress. But also the people that you're talking to need to realize that we don't know the answers. And if we can get there together properly, and there might be a little bit of compromise, then it's going to be, I don't like that word, but the reality is, we're building a new world and we need to make it better than the one before. And I think that's how we look at it anyway. So sorry, Skye, I just sort of throw that in there before I came to you.
No, that's totally fine. I think loneliness, like many things, is a spectrum. And I think for us, people who were motivated to look at the connection opportunities, there was more than enough in our organisation. It's part of our DNA in our organisation to be always doing things. There's events, there's all sorts of opportunities to join live streams, join webinars, join wellbeing seminars, all sorts of things, because we have a number of ambassadors for AIA and lots of opportunities to connect through that, even virtually. And now that we're able to actually leave our houses, we do lots of activities as well that people can stay connected on. So I think at that, where you wanted the connection, there was sort of the opportunity to seek that out and take advantage of it in our organisation. We also did a number of things around providing opportunities for people to reset. So and these are practices we've continued. So our meetings are hard-coded to run for 25 minutes if it's a 30-minute meeting, 55 minutes if it's 60 minutes. So it automatically comes up like that in your calendar to give people, just that 5-minute window to reset. We're used to an old world where you'd be walking down the hallway at least to change meeting rooms, but now you're literally clicking a button and clicking another button. And we found our people were just exhausted. And then we've kept our Friday afternoons meeting free as well. But that's now going from connecting with your family to actually connecting with your colleagues as well, because you're not sitting in meetings all day. So I think at that end of the spectrum, more than enough opportunity for people who are feeling a bit lonely to get the connection. But as we all know, there's another end of that spectrum where actually the motivation to go out there and do something to get connected is waning. And so in those spaces, that's really where our investment in our leader capability to spot that and have that kind of conversation really openly and with empathy for our people on what else we could be doing to support them through that. Because not everybody has people in their home. And during COVID and lockdowns, that's a lot of time to be completely isolated from anyone physically to see on a day-to-day basis. So certainly that early intervention through a leader spotting that. And at the moment, we're going through a bit of an immersion program to skill up a number of mental health first aiders as well. So it's not just the leaders, it can be your colleagues as well that have that skill to spot that something might be going off the rails. And how do we make sure that we're putting the early support in for that person?
Yeah, look, and those that are leading people out there listening to this webinar, just be vulnerable, people. One of the biggest results we got from a webinar was when I spoke about my troubles and my anxiety because the second lockdown, my wife wasn't there. She was in Italy, and I really struggled 3 days with anxiety, and I had to deal with it and talk about it. And I talked about it with Fiona, but I talked about it on a webinar, and that gives other people the right. So when you're leading, it's okay, because everyone on this call, I'm not going to ask you, but everyone on this call would have gone through their own issues during lockdown. And once you share those as a leader, it gives other people permission. I'm going to throw to you now, Fiona, but I just wanted to answer Jared Bevan's question: what level of participation has Groov had with its app within corporates, and how do you maximize participation? Really great question. One of the early things we found is we didn't want to call it an app, but we didn't know what to call it, because actually what we're trying to do is empower the individual to actually understand and have a daily mental health plan. So some people use it every day. Some people know it's there. Some people come in a couple of times a week, but we're not actually worried about the app and how many times people are using it. We're worrying about how much it affects them. But our stats are much higher than others, so that makes us really proud. But we're also trying to change the dialogue around it. Everyone deals with their mental health and wealth differently, and so the app is just really a tool that we want you to know that is there as a bit of a safety net. But yeah, we're really proud of the engagement. So loneliness, Fiona, you and I have spoken about this before, and I doubled that up with hybrid. I don't know, because every time I say hybrid, I think about a car that's half electric and half gas. We probably need to find another name, because hybrid is such this wide range of things now, isn't it?
I knew that you would think that. This is how we've now mind melding. And the app, yes, is just one part of what we offer. And so one of the things that I found with delivering workshops that we've been doing with our people, which we call lead show care. So everyone walks away with a plan for their own well-being. There's a way of bringing well-being into the workplace, which is show and care as having ways to look after those who are vulnerable. But during the course of these workshops, what was really interesting was, why do people like them? They turn up, why do they like them? And they really like them. And you know what? It was a connection, because what we did was we made sure that as you were building your plan, you were sharing what you were going to do. And in that sharing process, what happened was, in a work team, people started to know each other a bit better. And that was to JK's point about vulnerability. It's about commonalities within the workplace. Suddenly, someone you didn't know was like a Lego nerd. I'm out doing Lego. Someone's like, oh my goodness, I never knew I'm a Lego nerd. Or, I'm struggling a little bit because I do feel lonely. And someone will say that, and another person will say, me too. And so what we did see in the last year was a different layer of loneliness for people who were extroverts. The lockdowns were really difficult, and I'm sure that the three of you have seen that as well. And so people who had traditionally found the workplace a real source of energizing had lost that. And so they then had to think about how they maintain connections, which is so important because they are energized by those connections. So micro connections become really important. Walking in the park and just being able to notice as you're walking your dog, someone who's on the other side of the park, going to the barista that isn't at work, Skye, but might be down the road, and just noticing as they give you the coffee and having the quick chats. Those are connections. And actually building your life around micro connections, which the science is showing us is so important, was actually really important for extroverts to know, as was build your life now around those micro connections. JK.
What's a micro connection?
So a micro connection is like a connection of, you just might smile at someone across the way, or you go and you say hi to the barista, but you're not having an in-depth conversation about their family. You might, but it's those little things that we take for granted, or at the school gate when you see another dad. It's just those little things that if you are someone who needs those connections, then you can build them into your day. When we were all isolated, but we could walk out the door, that was important. And we have seen a rise in people who identify as lonely. And we know that as a predictor for poor well-being. So in workplaces, having ways where people can connect. So that's why those workshops were really interesting to me, because people were connecting in the chat. So we know that there are ways that you can build it into a work day where the work is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the place that gives you everything. Of course it's not. But what we do know, speaking to the question about the relationship between work and home, and if you're helping workplace wellbeing, does that help home? The research shows us yes. Actually, what it does is it has a cascade effect. If you are connecting at work, you've got little things that you're doing in your work day, and you are feeling valued, then that does have an impact in terms of your well-being at home, which of course impacts your partners and your children or your flatmates, because when you're pumping and feeling good, the people around you will be, will feel a little bit better as well. And also, yes, we know as human beings, we need to be providing connection. Connected teams collaborate more. So creating ways for us to know each other was what you were talking about, Ingrid, making sure that we individualize, we understand that it's not one size fits all. So we understand, we talk, we find out what people need. All of these little ways. One, it's connection, and two, it's the ability then to cater to the needs, which brings us to diversity and inclusion, because we know diverse teams are the teams that we're going to get most benefit from when it comes to things like innovation. But only if we understand our teams. Diversity alone is not going to do it. It's about not just inclusion, which is the practices to make people feel included. It's the feeling of belonging, and belonging becomes around connection. So it's all connected. Connection is all connected. And what I loved, everything that Skye and Brooke and Ingrid have talked about, are the little things that they're doing in the day about making individuals feel valued and welcome and heard. And that's really the key here. Hey, JK.
Yeah, and there's another really interesting thing, and I'll start with you, Ingrid, because you have an amazing leader in Steve. But what would your advice be to a leader that's probably a little bit more tentative or scared to step into this space? I know it's something that comes up with us a lot, how they could be a little bit more vulnerable or lead well-being when they don't feel that comfortable. I don't believe it's because they don't care about it. They just might not be as comfortable as others. So any advice you could give people on maybe how you've helped someone who's gone from being quite reserved to being a good well-being lead?
It's a great question. And Stephen, who you're referring to, I partnered with him actually for 6 years. It's a long time. And I think in that time, starting those conversations 6 years ago was just about building a compelling reason as to why we're even talking about well-being. And I think some leaders still need some convincing there, less so now after the pandemic. Unfortunately, we needed a pandemic to sort of really accelerate and magnify this as a conversation at the C-suite, and recognizing that it's a leadership conversation. But I think some of my observations, perhaps, rather than saying this is how I coach Steve, because I like to say I had a magic recipe, I didn't. But there were others in the team that were very willing to share some of their stories. And so perhaps start with those that are willing. It doesn't always have to be the CEO or the MD. It could be other senior leaders, or it could even just be other influencers in the business. And as you see the response to the storytelling and the vulnerability, I really do think others are inspired by it and actually think, wow, where I thought perhaps this person being vulnerable might have resulted in people questioning them or thinking less of them, it's done quite the opposite. And so then you get this bit of a snowball effect. And so I think, I don't know, if I reflect back 5 years ago that I started with Steve, I definitely started with him in terms of the compelling reason as to why we should be doing this. But I think it was through others in the organisation that did want to share their voice that then inspired him and others to do the same. And then once you do it, and once you see the response to it and how human it is and how people react to it, then it inspires you to continue to do it. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's probably just a transparent reflection of the last 5 years of how I've seen that evolve.
Very helpful. And Skye, I know Damien's pretty good at this space as well, but have you got any other experiences that might help?
I don't actually think I need any help to help Damien become more emotionally vulnerable. We often joke that we've got the balance wrong. Normally it's the HR person that has the heart and the CEO's got the head. We've completely mixed that up. I'm the head, thinking about the logical business choice, and Damien's worrying about how everyone will feel. And so it's a really ironic balance of roles between the two of us, I must admit, but a good balance. So certainly, I think Damien is absolutely emotionally vulnerable in all the right and good ways. So he's not a blubbering mess, but he certainly is willing to open up and share who he is as a real person, which I think sets that role modeling from the top of the organisation. And you certainly can't underestimate the value of having just a really good human. As your CEO. So I think that's often how I describe our CEO, and he's a bit chaotic and he comes with his challenges, but why wouldn't you want a really good human running your organization? So I think that is core, and not underestimating the value of empathy. But to your question around advice for a leader who's a bit out of their comfort zone, find someone that you're okay to be vulnerable with. A peer, a fellow leader often helps, that someone who's kind of been further on their journey than you, and then you can kind of explore that in a safe environment, test and learn before you're necessarily opening up in a broader in forum with all of your staff or your employees. That can kind of help you to have that safer learning environment, because it is something that you've got to learn. If you haven't grown up in an environment where that's the normal practice in your home and your family, it is a real skill to learn to be able to do that, and to do it genuinely, not like it looks like you're following a manual, because people can see if you're kind of ticking the boxes. Okay, be human at the start of the meeting. Go, tick, done. Okay, moving on. That's really noticeable if you're not genuine about it. So I think that's probably the key, is find that safe place and test and learn.
Brooke, I'm not going to get you to answer that question, only because Alan Boyd has sent an amazing question and a difficult one. So I'm going to throw that straight to you. What's the panel's thoughts on the working environment at home? Whose responsibility is it to provide a safe environment, not just mentally, but also physically? We had one of our workers, and they were sharing the toilet during COVID on a rotational basis as an office. So, that's probably the extreme when we were looking after them. But it's a difficult question, right?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alan. I did actually see it earlier. And my view on this is, I mean, it might be somewhere in between, but I think that it's a shared responsibility. As an employer, of course, we have a duty of care to look after our people, and I think for most organisations and for most leaders, that is a genuine want to look after their people and ensure that the work environment, whether that's at home or whether that's in a traditional office, is the right place for them and is a safe place for them. But then it is hard to really connect with every single person. Obviously, that's the role of the leader, and we encourage, coach our people through that. But it's also we rely on people feeling like they can speak up, can talk to us, and also play a role in being able to feed that to us around what they need. So hopefully that's not a politician's answer, but somewhere in between, I do think it's a shared responsibility.
And Fiona, I'm going to throw this one to you, because Amanda's asked, and I think this is a really good one because I'm dealing with it all the time. How would you encourage younger people in a predominantly older corporate setting to engage in their workplace and maintain their well-being? And I'm finding this in quite a few of the traditional, the traditional industries, accountancy, lawyers, that sort of stuff, where there's been some really interesting work ethic, 12, 14 hours a day. I guess that's something that's difficult to break down some of those older systems.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have seen is that some of the younger people are actually better than the older people. Speaking as a lawyer, I found that the younger lawyers, even though I still work as a legal writer sometimes, just occasionally, but we have worked with law firms. And so with the younger people, I think they tend to be a little bit more in touch with that whole idea that this is important, and that bums on seats hours during the day does not equal productivity, which is really tricky for a law firm. So I'm just thinking about some of those issues with older people saying to me, Fiona, how do we get the young people to just engage at work? Because all they do is care about their well-being. And you say, well, okay, let's think about this and unpack this. One of the things is that they're just more aware of the fact that to be productive, you don't need to work, possibly don't need to work those 60-hour weeks. So there might be that. And the other thing is that they're facing different challenges than perhaps I did. I think about me as a young lawyer in the 1980s, very different from the young ones that are coming through who've got issues like social media, climate change, some social issues, and they've just come through a pandemic. So I haven't seen that as an issue. What I have seen is that a divide between what's happening right now, which is this idea we want people to come back to work. We want to encourage people to come back to work. And sometimes people don't want to come back to work because they've, for whatever reason, working away from work has worked for them. That is a challenge. And then the young ones actually, when they're coming back, are going, well, this is just not much fun. How do we create... One of the challenges that we are facing is creating the environment where young people actually want to come into work, because they actually do understand their well-being and they want it to be a bit of fun and they want us to protect their well-being. So I think one of the ways to bring young ones back is to create the culture of well-being, which will be good for everyone. So I do think that's actually the problem that we have might be the answer. We need to be creating environments where well-being is actually front and center, and the young will come because they're already more sensible than the oldies like me. I don't know if is that what you're finding, Ingrid?
Well, I think absolutely to your point, Fiona, about I feel like our earlier in career talent are very open and transparent with what their preferences are and how they see the organisation can support them. So I find it actually refreshing and in somewhat easier because they're very proactive in sharing that. And I'm also reminded just generally about how we do have different demographics. This comes back to that personalisation a bit more in our workplaces. And what's been interesting for us is recognising that earlier in career and how we think about some unique considerations for them may be different to how we think more broadly. So understanding when it's common and core and when we need to do some more customisation, and earlier in career would be one. Another interesting one for us actually, as we build out our employee resource groups, which is community groups, is families. And so we're also seeing a big interest in what's the role of how does the organisation best support those with caring responsibilities as well. And so I don't want to go off topic, but I suppose my thoughts are, Fiona, yes, I find that they're very engaged in these conversations and very proactive, which I really enjoy and really helps inform. But secondly, just realising that there are different demographics in our organisation that need and are looking for slightly different things, and it's not always a one size fits all.
Well, we have run out of time. So Ingrid, Skye, Brooke, and the lovely Dr. Fiona, who I work with all the time, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely amazing. For me, what I've sort of learned out of today's webinar is, genuinely talk to your people, genuinely listen to them, and put actions out there that are going to help their well-being. So I think they're the key takeaways for me, and that people might sound easy, but it's actually pretty hard to do, because you have to genuinely listen and then genuinely put things in place that are going to go back to your people very quickly and make them feel that they are cared for. And we know at Groov that if you genuinely do that, if people feel cared for, then they will actually start thinking better of your leaders, of your company as a whole. So I don't know, am I supposed to throw back to someone else? I never know what to do at the end of these. Tanya, I think you're going to close right at the very end. Is that on my brief? Because I just got so engrossed in that conversation. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We're going to wrap this into something you can download later and look at. So I'll throw back to you, Tanya. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, JK. You couldn't have summed that up better. And so grateful for you being here to lead the discussion with so much heart. Some resounding words from Ingrid are that we're here to be learning together. So I'm really grateful to everyone who's joined us today. I think it's more important than ever that we do come together and share our ideas, our experiences, because there's no magic fix to all of this, and we've just got to push on together in a beautifully connected way. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. A reminder that you'll be able to dive a bit deeper into these topics with the team at Groov at Workplace Wellness Festival coming up at the ICC in Sydney, 22nd and 23rd of June. We are returning to an in-person event. We are thrilled and can't wait to see all of you there. We also will be delivering our next webinar in the series right here in a couple of weeks. We'll send you all the details on email, and we'll send you a recording of today as well. So see you back here in a couple of weeks, and make sure you book in for the festival in June. Get your spot, and we'll see you there. Thanks for today. Bye.